Though Palestinians still outnumbered Jews by 2 to 1, they had no say in the government and had no influence on British public opinion. Palestinian communities in towns and villages, along with their cause, were either ignored by the Western camera or portrayed in biblical cliches. The traditional way of life of the Arabs was contrasted with an image of industrious and progressive Jews who'd concentrated their efforts in the fertile coastal areas. They'd built up a Western-style economy, drawing on powerful international support. They also had an underground army, 50,000 strong, the Haganah. By 1946, the Zionists were using all these resources to defy Britain's immigration quotas.
I joined the Bricha. Bricha means escape, which was a division of the Haganah, of the Jewish underground movement. And in fact, my job was to smuggle people from the German border into Belgium or into France directly, or from Belgium into France. Most of the DP, the displaced person camps, were in the British zone, and they wanted to stop the Jews from going to Palestine, and they realized that the Haganah was in fact taking them to Palestine.
Newsreels followed as thousands of refugees were shipped to Palestine. Most of the boats were arrested by the British Navy and escorted into Haifa. British soldiers sent the so-called illegals to detention camps. Britain was charged with inhumanity.
A great many were persuaded that they should go to Palestine, and I think they're probably conned into it in many ways because the Zionists wished to use them as instruments in securing their objectives. We felt that if we had simply, out of a great surge of humanitarianism, said, oh, you poor people, you better come in, it was going to fracture our entire policy, and we had to, well, harden our hearts a bit and turn them back, a lot of them to Cyprus.
Onto that British vessel, Zionists are transferred from a small Jewish refugee ship to be deported to Cyprus, and some try to resist. So near to Zion, and now to be taken away. Removed from their tiny craft, they leave what has been an ordeal of evil conditions, unsanitary overcrowding and thirst. But to them, internment on Cyprus is just another exile, and they have to be forced.
Bevin wanted no more refugees in Palestine than the Arabs would agree to. But the Zionists demanded entry for 100,000 and had won the backing of the American president, Harry Truman. He controlled the aid that war-scarred Britain desperately needed.
I remember in Bevin's absence once, I had to receive the American ambassador. And he said he had a message from the president for the Secretary of State. The president wished to repeat his urgent and earnest request to admit immediately 100,000 Jewish refugees into Palestine. And I said that, according to my brief, I said that the Secretary of State's view was that this was simply a recipe for war. Well, the ambassador had expected this, and he simply said, very deliberately, the fact is that the president believes that if Mr. Bevin can accede to his request, that would help Britain's friends in Congress to get through the latest appropriation of British aid, which is how a diplomat says, I mean, there was bread rationing in Britain at that time, that's how a diplomat says, you do what we want or you'll go hungry.
And back here in Washington, domestic reflections of Palestine's days of crisis. President Truman meets with members of the Jewish war veterans, here to press demands for immediate admission of 100,000 refugees.
America had the largest Jewish community in the world. For Truman, their votes were vital. Influential Zionists had regular access to the White House, and some contributed generously to Truman's campaign funds.
President Truman's attitude toward Palestine was made up of mixed motives. He had been deeply horrified by the full scope of the Holocaust when we got into Eastern Europe and found out what that meant. He, of course, was heavily involved with Jewish people in the United States who were in support of Palestine from a political point of view.
Before every election, the influence of the Zionists reached a peak. In the summer of 1946, they urged Truman to call for partition, to create an independent Jewish state in a divided Palestine. White House aides persuaded Truman to support the Zionists' new demand.
As time went on, he concluded that the British were not going to solve the problem. He felt that there was substantial vacillation on the part of the British, and he came to the conclusion that if there was ever to be a Jewish homeland, which he desired greatly, it would have to be accomplished through partition.
Attlee and Bevin believed they were winning American support for a policy acceptable to the Arabs. The telegram from Truman telling them the opposite reached Attlee in Paris.
The telegram was brought to us, I think, in the middle of the night or early in the morning, anyhow, before breakfast. We read it, and I took it to Attlee, who was having breakfast in bed. And he read the telegram through and said, handed it back to me. He said, "I'll send him a stinker. Go and draft it."
It made no difference to President Truman, though, whether they were upset or whether they weren't upset. He had a goal, and he was determined to achieve it.
In Palestine itself, the Zionists had turned to more direct methods. The campaign was led in secret by David Ben-Gurion and the leaders of the Jewish Agency, official advisors to the colonial government. Now they linked up with Menachem Begin, leader of the Irgun, and other extremists. This Irgun film helped raise money in America for secret shipments of arms.
We are no longer content with words alone. Only thus shall we win our freedom. We have heard the speeches and tried every means. Now we fight. I and my fellow fighters in the Hebrew resistance are answering British guns with Hebrew guns.
We did, of course, have an enormous amount of covered information about the organization of Jewish terrorism and the supply of arms, equipment, and so on to the Jewish terrorists. The Jewish Agency always denied that they were the policy makers in regard to acts of terrorism, but we knew a bit better than that.
The British wanted to prove the Jewish Agency's complicity in terrorism. In June 1946, troops arrested its leaders, rounded up some 3,000 people, and raided the kibbutzim, the suspected arsenals of the underground army, the Haganah.
Our infrastructure were the kibbutzim. The kibbutzim, like the kibbutz that we are just now, the kibbutzim was a place where we could pass for just civilians. We were working there for 15 days every month in order to make our living, and 15 days we were trained. And in every kibbutz, we have a store, underground store for arms.
One of the unit, in fact, who were searching an outhouse and toilet, he had occasion, in fact, to use the toilet, and was quite surprised that once having pulled the chain and levered the seat in a particular direction, he started, in fact, to rise on his seat. And this revealed a tunnel beneath, which led to an arms cache which contained something in excess of 500 rifles and about 3,000 grenades. And he was a very surprised man.
Arms caches revealed an extensive network of military preparations. Ironically, it was the British who had first armed and trained Jewish settlers. Now, the guns were turned on their instructors, but the British were determined to keep their Palestine base.